I'd like to begin by acknowledging that this service is being held by a community that gathers on the stolen traditional lands of the Massachusetts, Nipmuc, Pawtucket, and Wampanoag people. We pay respect to those indigenous peoples who lost their lives in the colonization of this land and recognize that these indigenous peoples and tribes are still today facing violations of sovereignty, territory, and water. We also give thanks for the earth we walk upon, the waters, the life-giving plants, and all the earth's creatures, as well as the winds, sun, moon, and stars. We recognize that this is just a first step in moving towards right relationship with native peoples and healing of the earth. Good morning. It's been a rather exciting morning, but we're all here and safe, which is good. So I welcome you to the First Parish Church of Stowe and Acton, a welcoming and spiritual community. My name is Neil Saunders, and I serve as chair of the worship committee. If this is your first time with us, we welcome you. Please let us know you were here by filling out one of the visitor information cards in the pews and hand it to an usher or drop it in the plate. Please feel free to ask me for more information about the church and its programs after the service, or our tech and Zoom hosts through the chat if you're online. Our minister and staff are mostly on break for the summer, but they are listed on the front of the order of service. Our services are now mask optional, but there is a masking required section to my left at the back of the church, the last 4 pews on the far side, and in the center section, the last 2 pews, plus a row of chairs. If you would like a large print order of service or hymnal or an assisted listening device, please ask our ushers. Our assisted listening devices work throughout the building if you would like to listen to the service from another space for any reason. After the service, please join us for some social time in our fellowship hall, which is 1 level down at the other side of our building, to my left, your right, or in a breakout room if you're joining us online. I'd also like to draw your attention to the announcements in our order of service and invite you to check out our webpage for more information, where you can sign up for our newsletter and email alerts. And now let us come together for a time of community, singing, and worship.
Good morning. I'm Shana Dumont, Garr, a member, but because the first year and a half I joined, I had a mask on. I'm often re-meeting many of you. And so next we will have opening words and a chalice lighting by Tommy Garr. And the opening words are by Wendell Berry, and they're number 465 in the Singing the Living tradition if you wanted to read along with me. So as I read along, Tommy, if you'd like to come up and light the chalice and the wisdom to survive. If we will have the wisdom to survive, to stand like slow-growing trees on a ruined place, if we will make our seasons welcome here, asking not too much of earth or heaven, their houses strongly placed upon the valley sides, and over it, birdsong like a canopy. On the steeps where greed and ignorance cut down the old forest, The veins of forgotten springs will have opened. Families will be singing in the fields. They will take nothing from the ground. They will not return, whatever the grief at parting. The abundance of this place, the songs of its people and its birds, will be health and wisdom and indwelling light. Beautiful. Thank you all so much for contributing to that. And next we will have the hymn, Morning Has Broken by Trish, and the number is 38. You're welcome to rise and sing. We will now rise for the covenant and affirmation. And if we could please say it together. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. We'll now have a musical interlude by Trish Woods. The title is The Loveliest of Trees. You might notice a theme coming through this service today.
Now is the time in our service when we invite you to share your joys and sorrows. As our lives unfold through the summer season, there are moments of happiness and gratitude that call out to be shared. So too, each of us at times experiences loss or concerns for a loved one that we wish to share with our community. Please say your name and share briefly your joy or sorrow. And we'll begin here in the sanctuary. Okay, let's light one last candle for all those joys and sorrows in our hearts, but remain unspoken.
The next prayer, I forgot the poem by Friedrich Hölderlin, and it's not readily available online. So I'm taking the opportunity to freestyle a little bit. And the theme of this week's sermon is about connecting philosophy with communication with trees. And I know all of you love trees in some way. So we're going to take about a minute to have a meditation, but I wanted to set you up with the meditation. So before I ring this, which I don't have a lot of experience doing, so bear with me, I wanted to ask you to think about your favorite tree. And it could be from your childhood, it could be literally from your front yard right now, and maybe you just said goodbye to it before you drove here today. It could be from a place you went on vacation. Or maybe you don't have one, and then you could think of another plant that you love. So we all know that plants are non-human beings, they're non-verbal, but in some way, because they're living, there's ways that we communicate with them. And that's part of what I'll be talking about later. But so for this meditation, I want you to just kind of think about it and think about your appreciation of it, of them. So here we go. Thank you. And next we will have a reading. Next we will have a reading of the poem Marine by Arthur Rimbaud, and I welcome June McKnight to do this reading. Thank you so much.
The chariots of silver and copper, the prows of steel and silver, beat the foam, uprooting the stumps of the brambles. The currents of the moor and the vast ruts of the backward surge run in circles toward the east, toward the pillars of the forest, toward the bowls of the jetty, whose corner is battered by whirlwinds of light.
Our offertory plate for July and August is being shared with two organizations. Horizons at LMS is part of a national summer program for underserviced youth. It creates community, exposes children to nature, provides food and swimming lessons, and fills gaps in their education. And Libris para Todos offers teaching training workshops in and around San Miguel de Allende in Mexico to nurture students' literacy. It provides literature to students, and it arranges for school visits by the authors of books featured. As always, your generous support is appreciated.
I will now share with you some of my ideas about what philosophy and trees can remind us about coping with our mortality. So I begin by cutting right to the core of what most frightens us, death, and provide some historical, philosophical context for how we can cope with that. As humans, we carry the understanding that we will die with us throughout our lives. And other living beings, non-humans such as trees, do not seem troubled by this reality. Of course, we cannot be certain whether they live in fear of death. However, they seem to embody life and death in a more cyclical way. In Athens, Greece, a huge hill in the middle of the city has received the most attention for 2,000 years, is topped by the Parthenon, dedicated to the goddess Athena during the 5th century BCE. Facing this hill is another hill, just as tall, that's not talked about nearly as often. It's called the Hill of the Muses, and it's topped by Philopappus's monument and mausoleum, dedicated to a prince who died in 116 in the Common Era. And as you climb it, if you are fortunate, as I recently was, a guide will explain that in 1954, the Prime Minister Alexander Papagos followed his own individual impulse rather than the democratic means for which Athens is famed, and hired the architect Dimitris Pikionis, whose designs were decidedly out of fashion at the time, because he integrated plants with his buildings rather than the modernist style that was in vogue at the time. Pikionis redesigned that hill, and he restored the area. He prioritized growing trees again for the first time since the 1st century. For 2,000 years, it was bare of trees. And the reason is that the trees were clear-cut to build boats for ancient wars. And I'll get back to the reason why trees might not have been prioritized in Athens soon. So from the peak of this hill of the Muses, I look down at the city of Athens. It's this metropolis. It's beautiful, mostly white buildings and paved streets stretching all around the hill, with a beautiful ocean beyond. I admired the view, but especially one forest, a lone cluster of trees. And it turns out that it's the first cemetery of Athens, the oldest and largest, founded in 1837. The trees were left standing to shield people in their tombs after they died, the only place in the city where there is a forest growing. This convergence of a space where death is observed and trees are left to grow catches my attention. And this is partly where I'm coming to philosophy as a lens of our relationship with trees and non-human beings to help us better understand our relationship with life and death. Humans had an ambivalent rather than admiring relationship toward trees in the distant past. And I'm going to quote a scholar, Richard Pogue Harrison, who says, quote, "The trees became profane in about 30,000 BCE. So this is way, way, way back. Long time ago, way before Socrates, for a simple reason. They obstructed the communication of Jove, who at the time was who they understood as the father of the world's intentions. In other words, their canopies concealed an open view of the sky." And I'm continuing a quote here. "Where divinity had been identified with the sky, or with the eternal geometry of the stars, or with cosmic infinity, or with heaven, the forests became monstrous, for they hide the prospect of God." End quote. So this idea of cycles, right, of 30,000 years ago, having a forest canopy be so dense that it would hide the view of the sky and be something that the humans then would look at as profane. And then to have a relationship come so far full circle that now trees are something that we look at admiringly and that we want to grow. So again, this idea and this scholarship, I credit Robert Pogue Harrison. And so continuing with my own words now, long ago, before Socrates, humans lived in these woodlands, and so say a thunderstorm happened, and we're all very familiar with thunderstorms this summer, aren't we? They couldn't literally see the lightning, and they might hear the thunder, but not really understand the source. They could only guess. But one thing I know we have in common with the humans who lived then, they were very curious, and they would give anything to know. They wanted to know, and they wanted to control. They wanted to control the outcome. So they'd do anything they can to interpret what at the time they were thinking of as angry gods. So our relationship with trees has changed a great deal in 30,000 years of being humans. And humans essentially at that time, and for probably the next, say, 30,000 years, They wanted clearings to see the source of information. And in a way, the weather worked really well with me today, because we can all relate. A lot of our phones gave us a tornado warning, and that's frightening. And some of us might have gone to our basement. I did. But imagine if you didn't have a smartphone to reassure you why things were so dark at a time when you'd normally be seeing the sun. So over time, humans learned how to fell the trees and have control over the open spaces, and they were proud of this. This was part of how they were controlling the outcome of their lives. And if they didn't understand something, they were associating being able to clear-cut trees with control. And so this divide between humans and non-humans began to form, and even the term nature took hold. So again, humans are the only animals, who are aware they will die. And trees, here's the thing about trees that as a fellow living being that I take a lot of inspiration from and kind of wanted to share today, they continue to stand after they die. Their limbs still are elegantly outstretched, and their trunks are robust. After death, trees continue to shelter their woodlands community. The squirrels, chipmunks, many insects make it their home. Trees demonstrate remarkable patience. Humans utilize the wood of the trees for tools and shelter. And it's a great reminder every time we might take a walk in the woods or even just look out the window about the acceptance of the ephemerality of life and life cycles. And it is impossible to know whether trees truly accept life cycles, but if embodiment is their way of communicating, then I do suspect that they accept it. But what of the grief of the passage of a friend from living to deceased? And by friend, I do include trees. I had a Japanese maple die in my yard, and I still haven't gotten over it. It's been 3 years. So trees move from life to death in a distinctly different way than humans. And observing this evolving relationship with trees, woodlands, forests can help us understand how we are indistinct from nature. We are a part of nature. And rather than feeling less in comparison to these talents that we might not possess, this incredible patience, an ability to elegantly shift from life to death, we might realize that in the past, we might have been a tree. And I want to bring in a quote by Thich Nhat Hanh, quote, "We might have in the past been a cloud, a river, and the air. And I was a rock. I was minerals in the water. This is not a question of belief in reincarnation. This is the history of life on Earth," end quote. So I've had conversations with trees since I was a kid. And it is an energetic exchange. They don't literally talk back to me. So I'm not outing myself as a psychic right now. But I am taking this opportunity to kind of put the practice of communicating with trees into a philosophical context. And so this idea of death and rebirth, and bringing us to a branch of philosophy that a lot of us might have learned in school or have studied ourselves, Socrates and his student Plato. They also had the contemporary Aristotle, a scientist and a philosopher. So essentially they put a premium on what can be proven, what you can see and feel with the 5 known senses. What can be seen and quantified have been more valued than the things that cannot for the past 2,000 years. And by the other flip of the coin, art and poetics have been mistrusted. They have been secondary in this scheme of things. So I want to reintroduce us to their contemporary as well, Lucretius. And so Lucretius is someone who had been writing mostly in a poetic form. And way before there were microscopes, wrote in a very poetic way a poem called On the Nature of Things, that everything is composed of atoms. And he also stated that there's no afterlife, so don't worry about being perfect, because there's no heaven. You don't need to worry about perfection. And that's something that would have made someone like Plato or Socrates very upset, because they were interested in the very perfect forms, like the circles and the triangles. So I'm going to read you a little segment from Lucretius's On the Nature of Things. But shining grain fields sprout, and twigs grow green on trees. The trees grow too, and bear their fruits. Hence our kind and the animal kind are fed. Hence we see happy cities bloom with children, and leafy woods all filled with young birdsong. Hence flocks wearied with fat lay themselves down out in the fertile fields, and bright white liquor leaks from their swollen teats. Hence swollen lambs gambol on wobbly legs through tender grass, their baby hearts tipsy with whiny milk. Things seem to perish then, but they do not. Nature builds one from another, and lets no thing be born unless another helps by dying. So, the term humanism has a positive connotation, but it often does bring us to precipices, such as where we are with climate change and climate catastrophe. Humans often get caught up in hubris because they center themselves. Humanism, after all, how we might define it, is that humans are at the center. And by humans, we measure all things. Humans give themselves an excessive sense of responsibility. What if humans slow down and live more lightly? What if now is the time of gentleness and redemption? It has been called by post-humanists, this idea of being okay with indeterminacy. It's also been called a phrase, radical finitude. So a way to reach for this state of living a little more gently and lightly is to reconnect, to cultivate, to put down roots. I guess another familiar way to say it is to garden. And it is easier said than done to exist in the moment and to let go of control. Even now, when we hear a boom in the sky, it is scary. But we know it's thunder, rather than a message from Jove, father of the universe. But metaphorically, there still are booms from beyond, the unknown looming that we cannot understand. Nature is all here for that. We humans are not the protagonist, though in our minds we are. When we realize we're in fear and we can understand the entire world does not agree, it's human-centered. So, this is a suggestion that if we spend time near trees and other non-human beings in a relational way, rather than a transactional way, such as, how many cords of wood can I get from that fella over there? It can create a vibrational exchange that reminds us that we are not alone. Thank you. And now, in conclusion, I will read a benediction, which is, I think there might have been a typo for Isaiah 55, which is my error. It's Isaiah 35, and it's number 426 in Singing the Living Tradition. If anyone wanted to read along. The wilderness and dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom. Like the crocus, like the crocus it shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. And now we'll hear, now we will say the closing song together.